Hello, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Oh my God, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, of course Black Lives Matter. How about that San Francisco quarterback who's sitting down, kneeling on before the show during the Star-Spangled Banner? There seems to be a lot going on. The whole history of the country was birthed on a proposition that treated blacks as chattel. That's right, and it's rearing its ugly head 240 years later.
Yes, we're continuing on your interview with Randy Voller, the four-time mayor of Pittsburgh, and he brought up this issue of the 3/5 compromise. That was the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. Constitution and how this plays out today. And let's turn to the clip from Pittsburgh, North Carolina, a crucial battleground state in election 2016.
Oh, look, a walk-through drama, the Judgment House. There's the sign.
Right. What is the Judgment House? Is Judgment Day instead of Halloween, according to some?
My guess is that you're going to find a lot of Trump voters in here. They don't participate in Halloween because Halloween is seen as a pagan holiday, so they create this thing where people come in and I guess that they're judged.
They give candy back.
Perhaps.
As a papal indulgence. Perhaps.
But I mean, when you look at that and you wonder about why America has gone in these different directions, why would you have something called Judgment House? I mean, I grew up in a house where we questioned things, but we weren't judging each other. You know, we tried to get to the answer, but we weren't doing it from a preachy, judgmental point of view. Where
in American history did it all fall apart, Randy? Point your finger to that point in time. Was it the JFK assassination? What exactly was it? What happened?
I think it all fell apart with the 3/5 compromise.
The what?
When they decided in the Constitution that we were going to say that a slave was only 3/5 of a person from the very beginning, and we were going to say that people are property, so we're going to allow folks in the South that own chattel property to have congressional districts on the basis of apportionment. When does your John Deere tractor ever count for a person? Essentially, they're saying that chattel property counted for a person in the census. That's what the 3/5 compromise is.
But you're saying the Constitution that was stillborn.
I'm saying the Constitution had some, problems with it from the get-go, and the main problem was that compromise. I mean, that's what set up the Civil War. I mean, that's what set up this tension between different forces in this country. Those that believed in abolition, those that believed that all human rights mattered, versus those that wanted to protect a system that said this group of people were chattel, their property.
Well, you bring up an interesting point there, and I'm always interested in how, when you speak to most Americans, they will say that racism is not really an issue anymore in America, and yet it seems as though race has never really not been an issue and is as much an issue today as it's ever been.
It's always been an issue. Look, we're in a very historic town approaching a graveyard with the Episcopal Church where they hold all the slave records, by the way, because the original folks that had plantations were Episcopalian who came here. If you look at the tax records of Chatham County in Pittsburgh in 1860, the greatest wealth was the ownership of slaves. There were 4,500 slaves in Pittsburgh in 1860, and we only have 4,500 people here today. So think about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And in North Carolina, not to get too far off topic, but is there been as much activity in the private prison industry as elsewhere in the country? Because this is really the new model for slavery. You round folks up on trumped-up charges, and they're in prison, and it's majority by far blacks, and now they're working for $1 a day. Isn't that slavery, effectively?
Yes, I mean, essentially after Reconstruction, that was done in the Jim Crow era, where they essentially criminalize people. They'd say, okay, you're a criminal, the 13th Amendment applies to you except if you're a criminal, so you lose your rights and suddenly you're on a work farm. And the new work farm is essentially the school-to-prison pipeline and the privatization of prisons, which, of course, Wall Street's going to pump those stocks. I've thought that that's been one of the most egregious human rights issues in this country for years.
Oh, yeah. Well, great points made by Randy. Private prison business, the prison industrial complex, as some call it, the new slave state. Round up some blacks, put them in jail. They work for $1 a day. How is that not slavery?
Well, even that notion of the 3/5 of a human, you're not 5/5 of a human. The private prison industry, once you assign a profit as we've covered over and over, once you've assigned a profit to incarcerating a human, for taking away their freedom, it becomes ingrained in the economy, it becomes ingrained in the lobbyists that are lobbying our government and changing the government, changing the Constitution, denying constitutional rights to certain peoples. So here we have, the disenfranchisement of people who are thrown into prison for the profit of these private corporations. In the entire space of the United States, where residents, citizens and residents used to have constitutional rights, like to due process or to fair trials or to privacy. They used to have a right to privacy, that the government couldn't just come in and look in your bedroom and decide whether or not you're committing some sort of crime. Well, we then move on to this headline: AT&T is spying on Americans for profit. New documents reveal the telecom giant is doing NSA-style work for law enforcement without a warrant and earning millions of dollars a year from taxpayers. So this project is called Project Hemisphere. We might call it Project 3/5 or Project Chattel, because we are now, our data, our metadata is being assigned a profit value by AT&T, and they're using that data, they're using our metadata, and they're selling it to the NSA. And who is buying it? I.e. the taxpayer who is now chattel, who's now 3/5 of a human. Well, they are the actually ones paying it. The same citizens, the same taxpayers who have to pay the huge profits to the health industrial complex, the health insurance industrial complex now. They say that Hemisphere is a secretive program run by AT&T that searches trillions of call records and analyzes cellular data to determine where a target is located, with whom he speaks, and potentially why. So, Max, this information first emerged in 2013 when Hemisphere was exposed by the New York Times. At that time, the Department of Justice said that don't worry, people, this is just to stop drug lords and drug barons, and we're just using it, the DEA is using the Drug Enforcement Agency, they're using it to seize the assets of these drug bad guys, right? Well, the Daily Beast investigation found out that, in fact, they're using it for a wide range of things, from drug enforcement to murders and kidnappings to Medicaid fraud and things like that.
As if that would be used to fight drugs, but we know from the Eric Holder revelations that there is no war against drug lords, that they openly embrace them. They launder their money for them. They say they're too big to fail. HSBC and other banks are implicated. You mentioned that anytime you bring in the profit motive to the prison system, you end up with slavery. I think that's an excellent point. Anytime you ascribe profit motive to locking people up, you essentially have slavery. You combine that with the surveillance state, and you end up with an extension of this idea that Black Lives Matter. Because Black Lives Matter in the sense that we're all black now. We're all slaves. We're all in chains.
We're all
digital slaves.
We're all 3/5 of a human. And I mean, even once you enter the profit motive to certain things, like the basic necessities of life, so you have the Obamacare Affordable Care Act as well. So you're basically enslaved by that. You have to buy it. It's a law. You have to buy, in North Carolina, Blue Cross Blue Shield.
It's the company store.
In North Carolina is Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's the one company. That's the company store. As you mentioned, that's a one company. You are forced by law to have to buy their insurance product. 250,000 North Carolinians, for example, just now, this election, they've been dumped by United, they've been dumped by Aetna, so now they have to go buy Blue Cross Blue Shield because that's the one offer, that's the one guy that you could buy it from, that's the one company, and you have to buy it from them, or you're fined, or you're thrown in prison eventually once you have that. So going back to this unique program is, the law in the United States is that once law enforcement gets a warrant, goes to a judge, gets a warrant, and says, here is a bad guy. We believe he's a bad guy. I got the judge to believe I think I have enough evidence to say this is a bad guy. Here's my warrant. You, Twitter, or you, Facebook, or you, AT&T, from the data they already collect. Well, that's how it works for many companies like Twitter and Facebook still. But AT&T looked through their data and somebody said, hey, why don't we create a product? Well, Hemisphere isn't a partnership, but rather a product AT&T developed, marketed, and sold at a cost of $1 million per year to taxpayers. No warrant is required to make use of the company's massive trove of data, according to AT&T documents. Only a promise from law enforcement to not disclose Hemisphere if an investigation using it becomes public. They don't want the investigation to become public because they're afraid of brand damage. Now, AT&T, by the way, I'm going to show you how much power they have in this system where we have free market capitalism and all this competition, like on the marketplace in North Carolina where you have one option. Well, AT&T has a unique power to extract information from the metadata because it retains so much of it. The company owns more than 3/4 of U.S. landline switches. They own everything.
I'll give you another product. Cotton. And that's the product from 150 years ago, before the digital cotton of surveillance was being harvested.
Digital cotton.
By the slave master at AT&T. Now we all working on the plantation for AT&T in the big house. We gotta jump down, turn around, pick a bale of digital cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of digital cotton. Where's George Clinton, the funk master? Give me a new tune, give me a beat, because we're all, we're all black now, basically. I mean, that's the fact of the matter, is that the rights that the Black Lives Matter folks are working for apply to every frickin' American now, because you got these AT&T corporations up our swing show hard, spying on us on every move, selling our data to these big corporations. We're going down to company store to get health care, single provider health care. How about a single frickin' slave master? Now, obviously, historically, the time is ripe for change. And I mean real change.
Well, the Civil War will be between the people, the chattel. We're all chattel now. Corporations. But, this is why I think they're rushing in the TPP and TTIP sort of deals is, remember, they get their own justice system. So you can't even go to these. Right now, these people are technically breaking the Constitution, but once they have their own separate secret Constitution that you as a 3/5 of a human being, you're not allowed to know.
Where's Cornel West in all this? Professor Cornel West, he would agree with me that we all slaves now.
So AT&T has data going back to 2008 now compared to Verizon, which only collects your data for 12 months, and Sprint for 18 months. So here we have a collateralized chattel obligation, I think you can call it.
Sounds like the next billion-dollar industry. Don't go away, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to author and journalist Tim Shorrock. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you.
All right, we're having a fascinating discussion of Asia, Korea, North Korea. I just wanted to briefly return to the North Korean discussion that we were having.
Okay.
And because this Asia pivot that is being described by Hillary Clinton, North Korea is a big factor in all of this. And so your basic thoughts on this idea, and then we'll get into TPP in a second. But so North Korea, just to follow up, because it's generally misunderstood in many ways, as evidenced by my previous interview. Positing going forward that it has a much more constructive role to play in the region.
I didn't necessarily say constructive. I'm saying that they have a logic to them. They're not crazy. Okay, so there's a logic to what they do, and there's it's part of a well-planned, thought out policies that they have. It's not insane. I mean, they see their survival at stake, and so they're going to go ahead and build these weapons. I mean, there's no doubt this is a very cruel regime, the way it treats its own people, and it's far from I mean, this is a country that has tens of thousands of people in these prisons, and
okay. So if somebody we're looking at in the United States they arrived from another planet, and they looked only at the United States prison industrial complex, and they said it's got the biggest prison population in the world, and they throw people in prison for almost no reason at all. They would have the conclusion that this is a vastly dysfunctional country.
Exactly, they would, and it is.
Fair enough.
And we have a huge population of African Americans in our prisons. Many of them are run by private companies. They make profit off of that. How crazy is that?
Right. So when you point the finger for or pointing back. All right, so let's talk about TPP, this trade deal, which seems to be designed to exclude China in many ways.
Definitely designed that way.
Okay,
yeah.
so talk about this a little bit.
Well, they've been talking about this TPP for many years, and it is. They want to have this, agreement, free trade agreement, but it's mostly, an agreement for corporations and banks and financial companies, and, to allow, corporations to sue governments if they feel like policies run against, their interests, and would give huge amount of power to corporate interests. And yes, they do want to exclude China, and I think that's why it's having such a hard time within Asia itself. I mean, South Korea hasn't endorsed it. South Korea has very close ties with China, trade, economic. And so, there's a lot of contradictions in it built in. I think excluding China is to build like an alternative economic structure there. I don't think it's going to work, and I don't think it has worked.
It seems like it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. I mean, the relationship between China and the U.S., for example, with trade and finance is one where, if you go to Walmart today, you're paying a lot less for stuff because it's made in China. So if, in fact, the U.S. wants to pick this kind of trade war with China, that would mean that prices for stuff go up in the U.S. and then you'd have inflation. And then if you have inflation, I mean, interest rates have to be jacked up, and that means your whole housing bubble gets pricked, and your bond market that's been in place for 30 years is destroyed, and your economy goes into the toilet. So picking a trade war with China seems about the stupidest thing you could possibly do.
Well, not only that, they keep talking about like we got to have Chinese cooperation with North Korea. You can't be having a war against China and expect them to help the United States in kind of, decreasing the tensions and getting North Korea to do away with its nuclear weapons. If you want China to work on that, you can't treat them as an enemy.
There's a lot of hubris in all this, isn't there?
There is.
I mean, it's like in the UK, they want to do this Brexit thing, but they want to write the rules for their own Brexiting with the EU.
Right.
It's just remarkable hubris and arrogance.
By the UK and the US, yes, absolutely.
Right.
So we're gonna pressure you, China, but we want all the help you can give us on North Korea. In fact, we're going to depend on you to turn North Korea around. That's just not going to work. And the Chinese are already saying, there is a contradiction there.
And so it's patently unsustainable. And how would, if Hillary comes into office and she's pursuing this path and China essentially balks, and is this heading toward a more agitated confrontation between the two countries?
I mean, there already is a lot of minor confrontations going on. I mean, this Defense Secretary Ash Carter, they're sending, destroyers into, they're trying to, protect freedom of navigation, they call it. And, there's a lot of this kind of assertion of American power, sort of testing the Chinese. And I think there's a lot, this happens every day. And the Chinese are doing it with Japan.
Okay, China's like a multi-trillion-dollar economy. The U.S. is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, like $16, $17 trillion. They're one of the two biggest trading partners in the world. They're loggerheads. On the margins, there's some skirmishes and fighting, setting the stage for World War III. So why? Having anything to do with the U.S. elections, is it just because Putin looks like a really cool bad guy and it's easy to sell to stupid Americans?
In some ways, yes. I mean, you hear the same kind of language today you used to hear during the Cold War, except Russia's no longer a communist or socialist country at all. I mean, it's kind of a different situation.
So it's like all the retreads during summer when you see, Rocky Part 9. This is Cold War Part 2. It's sold to us from Hollywood for the same reason. It's box office, it sells.
Right.
But it makes no sense because what you're describing between U.S. and China is an actual precursor to a more heated conflict.
Yeah, but I think the United States knows, and the Pentagon knows. I mean, they do not want to get into a war with China. I mean, it's insane. I mean, nobody wants to get into a war, but generally the wars happen. Now let's try to shift gears a little bit for a second. So let's talk about the surveillance and intelligence industry in America. You've written extensively about this. AT&T spying on Americans for big profit. Something that to bring the North Korean reference into play here, we would say, oh my God, look what they're doing in North Korea. Well, what's going on here? AT&T spying on folks for years. They're handing over their information that they get from, tracking all the phone calls, and that's no surprise. I wasn't surprised by that report at all. This is a system they've built, and somebody uncovered it. And what's new? Really?
All right, we mentioned the private prison business. This is the private surveillance business.
Yeah, I differentiate between the telecom companies like AT&T that have been collaborating with the NSA for over a decade, or probably much longer than that actually, and the operational contractors that I write about. These are the defense contractors, these companies around here that are called Beltway bandits that provide technology and personnel to NSA, CIA.
Like Casey, I think is one of them.
I don't know about that company, but there's hundreds. There's SA. I wrote an article for The Nation recently about the 5 corporations that control, dominate U.S. intelligence industry. And there are 5 companies, for
Khaki, I meant.
Abuse at Abu Ghraib.
I said it to Casey, I meant khaki, yeah.
Yeah, khaki, that's the one.
Right.
And so, these companies are gigantic. And I said these 5 companies provide 80% of the contract personnel that work for U.S. intelligence. So basically they have a monopoly.
If the U.S. outsources all their intelligence, and they outsource all their military to contractors, and they outsource all their banking to Wall Street, what do we spend our taxes on?
Good question. It's go drive into Northern Virginia and look at all the housing, the incredible, glut of huge mansions around there. That's where the money's going.
Yeah, the White House becomes a conduit to just channel money into the pockets of these.
There was so much money sloshing through this area, it's not even funny.
This is the richest zip code in the country.
Absolutely.
I believe. Silicon Valley and this zip code is vying for attention. But you get into it, you write extensively about it. So AT&T, okay, so you make the distinction between the private contractors or the specific agency. Operational.
Yeah.
AT&T is systemically
telecom, yeah.
integrated into the entire system.
Right.
So can you just speak a little bit about that more?
Well, the telecom companies, they're the ones that control the trunk lines of the internet, basically. I mean, we know from, the stories that came out after.
But it's a utility. The phone company is a utility.
It's a utility, but they control these, these cables, and so the cables go right into their offices, and, the NSA has been tapping right into those cables, since right after 9/11, when they gave them blanket gave the NSA blanket authority to do surveillance on Americans within the United States.
Okay, again, I'm liking this whole North Korean connection now. So in other words, North Korea suffers from an identity crisis, as does America. So America is a lot more like North Korea than people are willing to accept. In that sense, you've got all the powers concentrated in North Korea, in the state. You don't have any representational democracy whatsoever.
No.
Right? You have, in the U.S., you have the illusion of representational democracy, but the state now controls vast arrays of surveillance, power, prison, the food, et cetera, right down the line. So it's become a prison state.
We have a prison industrial complex. We have an intelligence
It's a soft prison.
complex.
You can get your cable TV in your prison. What I call the casino gulag state, essentially, is America.
Okay.
You can play on the internet all day, but you don't have any freedom other than that. You can click on ads.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I think we have freedom here.
Is the trend heading, though, kind of in a more of a pernicious way? Or?
Yeah, I think, it's dangerous to have so much surveillance. And it's dangerous to have, how easy it is to get.
Would a President Clinton be a check on that?
I doubt it. I think she really likes this, aspect of American power.
So you're optimistic because that's your nature, or because of the facts?
I'm optimistic. I don't know if I am optimistic, but I guess, I do think we have a lot more freedom here than they do in North Korea, that's for sure. I wouldn't equate them at all.
All right, now, just in regard to the perception issue, in that I think the world sees America as Disneyland,
right,
where everyone's happy and free.
Right.
Well, that's false.
Right.
And to our discussion about North Korea, they see it as a crazy dictatorial prison, which is not the truth either.
Not the truth either.
Okay,
no.
that's my point. That's my point. Now, everyone knows that NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden actually worked for Booz Allen Hamilton. We mentioned the 5 companies.
Well, a week ago I was in Baltimore at this court hearing of this individual, Hal Martin, who had been stealing classified information from NSA, working for Booz and other companies since 1998. 18 years he's been taking it out. Booz is supposed to be, I describe them as kind of like they're the top lawyer of the NSA in some ways, of U.S. intelligence, consigliere, that's how I describe them. And they've promised, they have great internal security. Yet, here's a second guy comes up. 3 years after Snowden, here's another guy who's been taking classified information home for years and years and years. They didn't catch this guy. How can we trust this company?
Is it like the banking industry where you can just be an idiot, incompetent thief, and nobody cares? You just get promoted?
It's called too big to fail.
Too big to fail.
Some of these companies like SAIC, one of the big five, they've had disastrous programs that didn't go anywhere, cost taxpayers billions of dollars. They still get the contracts.
So moral
There's no
hazard and too big to fail is migrated into the intelligence.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of a sick situation, really, because banking is one thing where to have that, it's serious enough, but then intelligence, come on.
All right. Thanks so much, Tim Shorrock, for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Tim Shorrock. If you'd like to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.